as we launch into this, I would actually ask you both if there's a moment at which you realized that the standard tools that we are typically handed in our democracy might not be sufficient to steer our course. This is roughly the question we've asked others to answer, and I'm curious whether you each can identify a moment in your past when that became clear to you.
So that's a really interesting question. When did I have the sense that something was broken in our politics? I mean, for me, it's weird because I feel like I can go all the way back to my childhood in the 1990s. And I can remember even at that time, people saying, Washington is broken. Just look at this impeachment situation. Look at the effort to impeach Bill Clinton back during the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And I remember at that time, people sort of lamenting the fact that communication between the parties and between the American people even had started to decline in some radical way. And you were seeing that in the dysfunction in government. And I think that was true back then, but those are still those are the good old days looking back at it from now in terms of people's ability to get along and reason together and work together, whether in Congress or just in mainstream America, right? But I had an inkling even back then as a kid that something was souring the water a little bit. And that feeling has only grown over the course of really my entire life and certainly my adulthood and just kind of observing politics and, the way we've done it for a while now.
That's a great answer. When we come back to the discussion, I want to talk about this sense that it has only gotten clearer over time. I think it's an important one. But Nate, do you have a moment you can identify?
Yeah, I'm a little... probably a lot greener when it comes to this conversation. And I guess the amount of attention I've paid to the system itself and democracy as it stands and how it operates or inoperates in our country often. And for me, it really wasn't something I focused a lot of attention on until 2016. And it wasn't just the election being that year. I mean, that had a great deal to do about it. But it was more of a personal situation with, the beginning of the anthem protests in the NFL, started by Colin Kaepernick. And I shouldn't call them anthem protests because they weren't a protest of the national anthem, but yet a protest during the national anthem, bringing light to social injustice and the issues with police brutality and lack of accountability when officers are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And, I served for 10 years. I was in Iraq. I was in Afghanistan. I always thought of it as, I'm fighting for the American people. My involvement in politics and even really voting isn't important because no matter what, I'm going to serve the people. And I'll let them decide, and I'll just do the job. I'll do what I'm asked to do for my country. And so I'd never really thought about that. Thought about all of this until that kneeling, because it was after the military is when I played football. And I can tell you, in a football locker room and in the military, in a team room, the amount of diversity and different thought and beliefs and backgrounds, socioeconomic, whatever you want to call it, are very broad. We're as diverse as they come in both of those fields. Yet, because we go through stuff together, challenging stuff, and I'm not comparing going to war to playing a sport, but playing college football, playing the NFL, there's a lot of sacrifice that has to go into that as well to be elite, just a different type of sacrifice. So when, and we rise above all our differences when it's time to play the game, when it's time to go to battle. We fight for one another, the man on our left and right, woman on our left and right. And we would do anything for them. We would take a bullet for them. We don't even always like them or agree with everything that they say and think and believe, but we know they would do the same for us. And that is what's dramatically lost in our country. As far as just that love for one another and acceptance of differences and still being able to work together. So when I was seeing this happen with the election, and then when Colin started sitting on the bench and protesting, it became widely politicized, and it became once again an act or a situation that was taken both by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and used as a tool to prove their point, to prove why they are the more righteous party or the better party. And then, we've seen that obviously more recently with COVID and whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Everything is politicized. And it's like, it's going to be taken to the left, taken to the right, strong opinions about it. So my real understanding of how broken things were and how disgusting things were, in my opinion, was through that situation, because I wrote Colin an open letter. I ended up meeting with him, and it was through our discussion, our conversation, which was a pretty open-minded one from both of us. We didn't agree on a lot, but we listened to one another. That's where the decision for him to take a knee alongside his teammates versus sitting on the bench isolated came from. And I thought that was pretty powerful. I thought that was actually a good example of maybe how government in some ways should work. When we have these situations, like compromises are made, but everyone still feels empowered and like they have a part in this. So it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think it lays a bit of background. And for me, it's really just been the last 4 years that I've even really been paying attention, which is kind of embarrassing, but everything happens on our own time, I guess,
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating answer. For one thing, we have a lot of political dysfunction in this country, but for folks in the military, when decisions get politicized, it results in people dying. And so it really raises the stakes. Interesting that your awakening occurred after your service, if I understand your answer correctly. So if I want to actually put these two answers together, though, because there's something quite resonant for me in what you said, Nate, about the politicization of everything. And it really is this. This is the opposite of patriotism, is to politicize things where, in fact, the American public has an interest and it's not being served because the parties are busy catering to special interests that fuel them. And what they have us doing instead is fighting over symbolism, which is both a distraction from what's real and very destructive. But if we then look at what John said that the sense of how off things was clear back in the Clinton administration, which I agree. I think in some ways that's where part of this really began. But that it has only gotten worse over time, and that even the dysfunction around the Clinton years looks tame at this point. And so what I'm constantly facing is the suggestion Unity2020 is a really good idea, but we can't do it now. What we're facing is too important. And really the important recognition is the one that John made, which is it only gets worse. Because it only gets worse. As bad as you think this is, that's an argument to do it now rather than to wait, because doing it under even worse circumstances, and many people don't believe that's possible, but boy, is it, that will be even harder.